young rockers challenged the quiet older man testing guitars to play something current instead of old stuff. When David Gilmour accepted their challenge and played a modern hit with his legendary touch, the guitar shop fell silent in amazement and proved that masters adapt, they don't expire. It was a bustling Saturday afternoon in October 2023, and the cramped aisles of Anderton's Music Company in Denmark Street were filled with the weekend crowd of guitar enthusiasts, browsing musicians, and curious tourists exploring London's legendary music district. The multi-level store buzzed with the overlapping sounds of different guitars being tested simultaneously, creating a cacophonous symphony of musical possibilities that ranged from tentative beginner exercises to confident, professional demonstrations. On the store's upper level, in a quieter corner reserved for higher-end vintage instruments, David Gilmour was conducting his own private evaluation of several guitars he was considering for an upcoming recording project. At 77, he approached instrument selection with the methodical patience of someone who understood that the right guitar could make the difference between adequate music and transcendent art. He was testing the instruments quietly, using low amplifier volumes, and focusing on the subtle differences in tone, sustain, and responsiveness that only decades of experience could detect. Gilmour had chosen this particular Saturday afternoon specifically because he knew that Anderton's weekend crowd would provide enough ambient noise to mask his presence, allowing him to evaluate guitars without the attention that his identity typically attracted. He was dressed casually in jeans and a simple sweater, looking like any other serious musician taking time to properly assess potential purchases. Near the store's main demonstration area, a group of 5 young musicians had gathered around the latest high-end electric guitars, each trying to impress the others with their technical proficiency and knowledge of contemporary music. The group was led by Connor Mills, a 23-year-old guitarist whose YouTube channel had gained a modest following for its tutorials on current pop and rock songs. Connor carried himself with the confidence of someone who believed his generation had perfected guitar playing by combining traditional techniques with modern production approaches and contemporary musical sensibilities. His companions included Jake Thompson, a 21-year-old who specialized in recreating the exact guitar tones used in current hit songs, Maya Patel, a 22-year-old multi-instrumentalist who prided herself on staying current with emerging artists and trends, Alex Rivera, a 24-year-old session musician who had played on several indie recordings, and Sophie Chen, a 20-year-old music student whose social media presence focused on demonstrating how contemporary songs should be properly performed on guitar. The group had been holding court in the demonstration area for nearly an hour, drawing an audience of younger customers with their energetic performances of current hits and their confident commentary about the evolution of guitar music. They rotated between playing songs by Ed Sheeran, The Weeknd, Billie Eilish, and other contemporary artists, each performance accompanied by detailed explanations about modern guitar techniques and production approaches. The thing about today's music, Connor was explaining to their gathered audience while adjusting the settings on a high-end amplifier, is that it requires a completely different approach from what older generations used. We have to understand not just guitar technique, but also how guitars fit into contemporary production, how they interact with electronic elements, and how to create sounds that resonate with current audiences. Maya nodded enthusiastically while tuning her guitar. Exactly. Like the guitar work in Olivia Rodrigo's songs or Post Malone's acoustic tracks, requires understanding modern songwriting and contemporary emotional expression. You can't just rely on classic rock approaches and expect to connect with people who actually listen to current music. As their demonstration continued, Connor noticed the older man in the corner who had been quietly testing vintage guitars for the past hour. Something about the man's understated presence and methodical approach to instrument evaluation suggested a seriousness that contrasted with the energetic contemporary music surrounding him. "Look at that guy over there," Connor said to his group, nodding toward David Gilmour. "He's been playing the same old classic rock stuff for like an hour. That's exactly what I mean about older musicians being stuck in the past." Jake glanced over at Gilmour, who was currently playing a gentle improvisational piece that seemed to blend elements of blues and progressive rock. "Yeah, it's like they learned a few songs 40 years ago and never bothered to keep up with how music evolved. It's kind of sad, actually." Sophie, whose musical education had focused heavily on contemporary artists and current trends, felt emboldened by her friend's commentary. Someone should tell him that music has moved beyond that kind of playing. Like, people want to hear something current and relevant, not ancient history. The conversation might have remained among the five friends, but Connor's confidence in his musical knowledge and his desire to demonstrate leadership to his gathered audience led him to make a decision that would transform the afternoon from routine guitar shopping into an unforgettable musical education. "Excuse me, sir," Connor called out to David Gilmour, projecting his voice across the store, level with the authority of someone who believed he was offering constructive guidance to a fellow musician who had fallen behind the times. Gilmour looked up from the vintage Stratocaster he was evaluating, his expression showing polite interest in whatever this young man might want to discuss. "I couldn't help but notice you've been playing a lot of older material," Connor continued, his tone carrying the patient condescension of someone explaining obvious truths to someone who hadn't yet recognized them. "No offense, but that classic rock stuff is pretty dated. Why don't you try playing something current instead of old stuff? Something that people actually listen to these days." The suggestion immediately drew the attention of everyone in the surrounding area. Other customers stopped their own guitar testing to listen to what was clearly developing into some kind of musical confrontation, and the store staff paused their activities to observe what appeared to be a generational challenge about musical relevance. David Gilmour set down the vintage guitar he had been testing and looked at Connor with an expression that combined amusement with genuine curiosity. "Something current?" he asked mildly. "What did you have in mind?" Maya stepped forward, clearly excited by the opportunity to educate this older musician about contemporary music. "How about something by Ed Sheeran, or maybe Blinding Lights by The Weeknd? Those are songs that actually connect with modern audiences." Jake added his own suggestion. "Or you could try Bad Guy by Billie Eilish. That's got interesting guitar parts that require understanding current production styles, not just old-school rock techniques." Alex, the session musician, offered what he considered the ultimate contemporary challenge. "If you really want to test your adaptation skills, try Good For You by Olivia Rodrigo. It's got pop-punk elements, but you'd need to understand how contemporary songwriting works to make it sound authentic." Sophie concluded the group's challenge with confidence that bordered on smugness. "The point is, modern music requires different skills than what you're used to. It's not just about playing guitar, it's about understanding how guitar fits into today's musical landscape." David Gilmour listened to their suggestions with the thoughtful attention of someone genuinely interested in their perspective. "Those are all interesting choices," he said quietly. "I'm not sure I know them as well as you do, but I'd be willing to give one of them a try." Connor beamed with satisfaction at what he interpreted as an older musician's acknowledgement of his generation's superior musical knowledge. "Great! Let's start with Shape of You by Ed Sheeran. It's pretty straightforward, so it should be manageable, even if you're not used to current music." What happened next would be discussed and debated in guitar communities for months afterward, though the dozens of people who witnessed it firsthand would struggle to adequately describe the musical transformation they observed. David Gilmour picked up the guitar he had been testing, a vintage Fender Stratocaster that looked deceptively simple compared to the high-tech instruments the young musicians had been using, and spent a moment familiarizing himself with the song structure that Connor began humming and playing on his own guitar. Shape of You was indeed a contemporary hit, with a melody that was designed for mass appeal and production values that emphasized electronic elements over traditional guitar work. In its original form, the guitar parts were minimal and functional, serving the song's pop sensibilities without drawing attention to instrumental complexity. But when David Gilmour began playing his interpretation of the song, something extraordinary happened that no one in the guitar store had anticipated. Gilmour approached the contemporary pop song with the same musical intelligence and emotional depth that he had brought to Pink Floyd's most acclaimed work. He found melodic possibilities in Ed Sheeran's chord progressions that the original recording had never explored. His vibrato technique, one of the most distinctive elements of his playing style, transformed simple pop melodies into something that seemed to contain entire emotional conversations. The song's basic structure remained recognizable, but Gilmour's interpretation revealed harmonic and melodic dimensions that elevated the material far beyond its commercial origins. He wasn't simply replicating the original guitar parts. He was demonstrating how contemporary music could serve as a foundation for the same kind of musical expression that had made classic rock so enduring. As Gilmour played, the guitar store gradually fell silent. The young musicians who had challenged him to demonstrate his relevance found themselves witnessing something that contradicted everything they had assumed about the relationship between musical generations. This wasn't an older musician awkwardly attempting to copy contemporary music. This was a master artist showing how timeless musical principles could enhance and transform material from any era. Conor's confident expression slowly changed to one of amazement and confusion as he realized that his challenge had backfired spectacularly. The older man he had dismissed as musically outdated was playing Conor's suggested contemporary song with more musical sophistication and emotional depth than Conor had ever heard, including in the original recording. Maya, who prided herself on understanding contemporary musical expression, found herself experiencing emotions in response to Ed Sheeran's song that she had never felt before. Gilmour's interpretation wasn't just technically superior. It was revealing musical possibilities in familiar material that she hadn't known existed. Jake, the specialist in recreating exact guitar tones from current hits, realized he was listening to something that transcended mere technical replication. This was creative interpretation that used contemporary music as raw material for genuine artistic expression. Alex, the session musician, understood immediately that he was witnessing a level of musicianship that his experience in recording studios hadn't prepared him to recognize. This wasn't about knowing current songs. This was about understanding music itself at a level that could transform any material, regardless of its origin or intended style. Sophie, the music student, felt her entire understanding of musical development and artistic progression being challenged in real time. She had assumed that musical evolution meant replacing older approaches with newer ones, but Gilmour was demonstrating that true musical mastery meant being able to apply timeless principles to music from any period. When Gilmour finished his interpretation of Shape of You, the guitar store remained in complete silence for what felt like several minutes. Finally, Conor found his voice, though it carried none of the confidence he had displayed earlier. "That was, I've never heard that song sound like that," he managed to say. "It was still recognizable, but it was like you found something in it that I didn't know was there." Maya was more direct in her amazement. "I'm sorry, I don't know your name, but what you just played was incredible. You took a pop song that I thought I knew completely and made it sound like something I'd never heard before." Jake, still processing what he had witnessed, asked the question that would lead to the afternoon's most significant revelation. "How did you do that? I mean, I know that song inside and out. I've played it hundreds of times, but your version was completely different. It was like you were playing a different song that happened to have the same melody." David Gilmour smiled gently. "I'm David Gilmour," he said simply, "and what I did was approach your contemporary song the same way I would approach any piece of music, by trying to find what it wanted to express emotionally, and then using the guitar to help it say that as clearly as possible." The effect of Gilmour's introduction was immediate and profound. The 5 young musicians who had challenged him to demonstrate his relevance suddenly realized that they had just asked one of the most influential guitarists in rock history to prove that he could adapt to contemporary music. Connor's face went through several stages of expression as the full magnitude of the situation became clear to him. You're actually David Gilmour from Pink Floyd." "I am," Gilmour confirmed kindly. Sophie looked as if she wanted to disappear entirely. "We asked you to prove that you could play current music. We basically implied that you are musically outdated." "You did," Gilmour acknowledged with amusement. "And it was a fair challenge. Music does evolve, and musicians should be able to adapt to new styles and approaches. The question isn't whether I can play contemporary songs. The question is whether I can find something meaningful to say through them." Alex, trying to process the lesson he had just received, ventured a question. "Mr. Gilmour, what you just demonstrated, is that how you approach all music? Like, do you try to find emotional possibilities that might not be obvious in the original material?" "That's exactly right," Gilmour replied. "Every piece of music, regardless of when it was written or what style it represents, contains possibilities for emotional expression. The guitar is just a tool for exploring those possibilities and helping them become audible." Over the next hour, what had begun as a challenge about musical relevance became an impromptu masterclass in the relationship between technical skill and artistic interpretation. David Gilmour worked with each of the young musicians, showing them how to approach contemporary songs not as exercises in stylistic replication, but as opportunities for genuine musical expression. "The mistake," Gilmour explained as he guided Connor through a different approach to playing current hits, "is thinking that musical evolution means abandoning the principles that made earlier music effective. Contemporary music benefits from the same emotional honesty and technical skill that made classic music endure. The styles change, but the need for authentic expression remains constant." Maya asked about the relationship between following current trends and developing individual musical voice. "Mr. Gilmour, how do you balance staying current with maintaining your own artistic identity?" "The key," Gilmour responded, "is understanding that musical identity isn't about rejecting new music or clinging to old approaches. It's about developing a consistent way of approaching music that can adapt to any style or era. Your individual voice comes from how you use your skills to serve the music, not from limiting yourself to particular periods or genres." Jake wanted to understand the technical aspects of what he had witnessed. "When you played Shape of You, it sounded like you were using the same techniques I've seen in classic rock performances, but somehow they worked perfectly with contemporary music. How is that possible?" "Because the techniques aren't tied to specific eras," Gilmour explained. "Vibrato, bending, phrasing, dynamics, these are tools for musical expression. They work with any style of music because they serve emotional communication, not stylistic categorization." As the extended lesson concluded, Alex posed the question that had been building throughout their conversation. "Mr. Gilmour, do you think contemporary music is as valid and worthy as the classic music you're known for?" Gilmour's answer surprised them with its directness and sincerity. "Absolutely. Every generation creates music that speaks to their experience and their time. Contemporary artists like Ed Sheeran, Billie Eilish, and The Weeknd are doing exactly what musicians have always done. They're using the tools and opportunities available to them to create authentic expressions of what it means to be human in their particular moment. The challenge for any musician, regardless of when they started playing, is to remain open to what each era of music has to teach. I can learn from contemporary artists just as much as they might learn from approaches that were developed in earlier periods. Musical wisdom flows in all directions." Connor, who had begun the afternoon confident in his generation's musical superiority, found himself with a completely different understanding of how musical evolution actually works. "Mr. Gilmour, I owe you an apology. I assumed that newer automatically meant better. and that older musicians couldn't understand contemporary music. What you've shown me is that good music is good music, regardless of when it was created. When David Gilmour finally left Anderton's that afternoon, he had not only found the guitar he needed for his recording project, but had also reminded 5 young musicians that musical mastery isn't about representing particular eras. It's about developing the skills and sensitivity needed to find truth and beauty in music from any period. The story of the Contemporary Music Challenge spread quickly through London's guitar community, but not as a tale of generational conflict. Instead, it became a reminder that the best musicians never stop learning, never stop adapting, and never stop finding new ways to use their skills in service of authentic musical expression. 6 months later, Connor Mills released a video series called Timeless Techniques in Contemporary Music, which demonstrated how classic guitar approaches could enhance and deepen current songs. Maya Patel began incorporating elements of traditional guitar expression into her contemporary performances. Jake Thompson started studying classic rock techniques not as historical curiosities, but as tools that could enrich his work with current music. Each of them had learned the same lesson that afternoon. Masters don't expire because they understand that musical evolution isn't about replacing old with new. It's about finding ever more effective ways to use music's power to communicate authentic human experience, regardless of the era or style in which that experience is expressed. If this story of musical adaptation, generational respect, and the timeless nature of authentic artistic expression inspired you, make sure to subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. Share this video with anyone who believes that good music transcends generational boundaries and that the best artists never stop learning from every era of musical expression. Have you ever discovered that techniques from one musical period could enhance your understanding of completely different styles? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to ring that notification bell for more incredible stories about how musical mastery adapts and evolves while remaining true to timeless principles of authentic expression.